Captain Elena Vasca stood on the bridge of the UES Olive Branch and stared at the alien ships surrounding her vessel. There were 12 of them. Each one was bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls were dark and covered with strange symbols that glowed with pale blue light. They looked like predators, circling wounded prey. "Captain," her first officer said quietly, "they're charging weapons." Elena took a slow breath. This was it. First contact with alien life. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries. They had sent probes into the darkness. They had listened for signals from distant stars. They had hoped and wondered and prayed that they were not alone in the universe. Now they had their answer. They were not alone. And the aliens had guns pointed at them. "Power down our weapons," Elena said. The bridge went silent. Her crew turned to look at her with shock in their eyes. "Captain," her weapons officer asked, "did you say power down?" "Yes. All weapons offline. Now." "But Captain, they'll destroy us." Elena shook her head slowly. "Maybe they will. But we didn't come out here to start a war. We came to make friends." She walked to the communications console and opened a channel. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth ship Olive Branch. We come in peace. We mean you no harm. We only wish to talk." She broadcast the message in every language humanity knew. Then she waited. The alien ships did not fire. Instead, one of them moved closer. A beam of light shot out from its hull and surrounded the olive branch. Elena felt a strange tingling sensation wash over her body. She realized they were being scanned. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was deep and cold and spoke in perfect English. "You are new. You are weak. You will follow." It was not a request. It was a command. Elena smiled anyway. "We would be happy to follow. Thank you for not shooting us." That was how humanity met the galactic hegemony. The hegemony was old. They had ruled the galaxy for over 50,000 years. 12 species sat on the ruling council called the 12 Thrones. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved dozens of races. They believed in one simple truth: the strong rule and the weak obey. There was no other way. There had never been any other way. When human diplomats arrived at the hegemony's capital world, it did something that confused everyone. They brought gifts. They brought music and art and stories. They brought bottles of wine and boxes of chocolate. They smiled and bowed and spoke politely to everyone they met. Ambassador David Okonkwo led the diplomatic team. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a patient voice. He had spent 30 years helping nations on Earth make peace with each other. Now he had a bigger job. He wanted to make peace with the galaxy. "We are honored to meet you," David said to the 12 Thrones. "Humanity has so much to learn from your great civilization, and perhaps we have something to offer as well. We believe in cooperation. We believe that all species can benefit when they work together." The 12 Thrones looked down at him from their high seats. They were strange and terrible creatures. The Vectari were tall insects with razor-sharp limbs. The Morvex were massive reptiles with scales like iron. The Kalani were beautiful beings made of light and crystal. Each species was powerful in its own way. Each one had earned its place through war and conquest. They did not understand what this human was saying. "You wish to cooperate?" asked High Lord Vexen of the Vectari. His voice clicked and buzzed like an angry swarm of bees. "What do you offer in tribute?" "We don't offer tribute," David said gently. "We offer friendship, partnership. We can trade knowledge and culture. We can explore the universe together. We can help each other grow." The 12 Thrones laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Friendship," High Lord Vexen repeated. "This word has no meaning. There is only power. You have little power. Therefore, you will serve. This is the way of things." David did not get angry. He simply nodded and said, "I understand. That is how things have been. But perhaps they can change. Give us a chance. Let us show you what humanity can offer." For 15 years, David Okonkwo and his team tried to show them. They traveled to every world in the hegemony. They met with leaders and scientists and artists. They offered trade agreements that would benefit everyone equally. They shared human technology freely, asking for nothing in return. They invited alien scholars to visit Earth, learn about human history and culture. Some of the lower species in the hegemony were amazed by these strange creatures. The Kalani, who had been conquered long ago, secretly admired human kindness. The Morvik, who worked as slaves in the hegemony's mines, whispered stories about beings who treated everyone with respect. But the 12 Thrones saw only weakness. "They do not fight," High Lord Vexen reported to the council. "When we insult them, they smile. When we threaten them, they offer more gifts. They are prey animals pretending to be something else." "Perhaps they are simply afraid," suggested another throne. "No," Vexen said slowly. "I have looked into their eyes. They are not afraid. They truly believe this nonsense about peace and cooperation. They think they can change us." He made a sound that might have been laughter. "They are fools." The 12 Thrones agreed on one thing. Humanity was useful for now. They had clever technology and worked hard, but eventually they would need to learn their place. Every species did. It was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, humanity kept trying. David Okonkwo spent 15 years away from his family. He missed the birth of his grandchildren. He missed his wife's funeral. He gave everything he had to the dream of peace. When younger diplomats asked him why he kept going, when the answer was always no, he would smile sadly. "Because peace is worth fighting for," he would say, "even when it seems impossible. Especially when it seems impossible." Humanity has learned this lesson many times. We have had terrible wars among ourselves. We have done horrible things to each other, but we always found our way back to peace. I believe the galaxy can learn this too. On the last day of the 15th year, David received a message from the 12 Thrones. It was not a trade agreement. It was not an invitation to talk. It was a warning. Prey does not negotiate with predators. 15 cycles you have wasted with your foolish words of peace. Now you will learn your place. Now you will learn what happens to the weak. David read the message 3 times. Then he sat alone in his quarters and cried. Not for himself. Not even for humanity. He cried for the galaxy. He cried for all the blood that would be spilled because 12 ancient species could not imagine a universe where strength and kindness lived together. When he was done crying, he stood up and sent a message to Earth. They have chosen war. May God forgive them. And may God forgive us for what we will have to become. The morning sun rose over New Geneva like it did every day. Children walked to school. Parents went to work. Old couples sat in parks and watched birds fly between the tall buildings. It was a beautiful colony on a beautiful world. 3 million people called it home. None of them knew that death was falling from the sky. Commander James Harrington was eating breakfast with his daughter when the alarms started screaming. He dropped his coffee cup and ran to the window. High above the city, he saw fire. Dozens of streaks of burning light cut through the clouds. They were not meteors. They were too precise, too organized, Daddy. His daughter Maya asked. She was only 8 years old. James grabbed her hand. We need to go, sweetheart. Right now. The first orbital strike hit the city center. A column of white fire rose into the sky. Buildings that had stood for 100 years turned to dust in a single second. The ground shook so hard that James fell against the wall. Car alarms screamed. People screamed louder. James had been a soldier for 20 years. He had trained for this. He had prayed it would never happen. Now it was happening, and he had minutes to save as many people as he could. All units. This is Commander Harrington. He spoke into his radio as he ran through the streets, carrying Maya in his arms. This is not a drill. Enemy forces are bombarding the city. Begin emergency evacuation procedures immediately. Get everyone to the underground shelters. Move. The Vectari warships hung in the sky like dark gods. They did not send warnings. They did not demand surrender. They simply rained fire down on the humans below. This was not war. This was extermination. James reached the evacuation center and handed Maya to his wife, Sarah. She was crying, but her hands were steady. Get her on a ship, James said. Get off this planet. Come with us, Sarah begged. James looked back at the burning city. He could hear people screaming, children crying, families trapped in buildings that were falling apart. He could not leave them. I have to stay, he said quietly. Someone has to buy you time. Sarah understood. She had always understood. She kissed him one last time and whispered, "Come back to me." James watched them board the evacuation ship. He watched it rise into the sky and disappear into the clouds. Then he picked up his rifle and went back to work. For the next 6 hours, James Harrington became a legend. He organized rescue teams. He led people through burning streets to safety. He carried wounded civilians on his back. When Vectari ground troops landed, he fought them with everything he had. He was shot twice, but kept moving. By the end of the day, James had saved over 2,000 lives. But 3 million people had lived in New Geneva. Most of them did not make it. This was not the only attack. Across human space, the same horror was playing out on a dozen worlds. The hegemony had planned this carefully. They struck everywhere at once, giving humanity no time to respond. Colony after colony burned. Ships were destroyed before they could escape. Millions of people died in a single day. On Earth, President Yuki Tanaka watched the reports come in. Each one was worse than the last. She had been president for only 2 years. She had spent her whole career working for peace. Now she was watching her people die. Her advisors gathered around her, talking loudly about responses and strategies and military options. But Tanaka was not listening. She was looking at a photograph on her desk. It showed a young girl smiling and holding a flower. The girl was her granddaughter. She lived on New Geneva. President Tanaka, one of her advisors, said, "We need to address the public. People are scared. They need to hear from you." Tanaka nodded slowly. She stood up and walked to the broadcast room. The cameras turned on. Across Earth and every surviving human colony, people stopped what they were doing and watched their president. She looked tired. She looked sad. But when she spoke, her voice did not shake. "My fellow humans," she began. "Today we have suffered a terrible loss. The hegemony has attacked our colonies without warning and without mercy. Millions of our brothers and sisters are gone. Cities that we built with hope and love are now ash." She paused and took a breath. "For 15 years we extended our hand in friendship to the galaxy. We offered peace. We offered cooperation. We offered everything we had to give. And what did we receive in return? War. Destruction. The murder of our children." Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. She had cried enough. Now it was time for something else. We asked for nothing but peace. We wanted to be friends with the stars. That dream is dead now. The hegemony killed it today. She leaned forward and something changed in her face. The sadness was still there, but underneath it was something older. Something harder. Very well. They have made their choice. Now humanity will make ours. Deep beneath the frozen ice of the Arctic, there was a place that did not appear on any map. It had no name. Its existence was the greatest secret humanity had ever kept. For over 100 years, Earth's brightest scientists had worked there on projects that they hoped would never be needed. Project Prometheus was about energy. It could power weapons that could tear holes in space itself. Project Fenrir was about soldiers. It could create warriors that could fight for days without rest and heal from wounds that would kill normal humans. Project Lazarus was about survival. It could bring entire cities back from the dead, rebuild them faster than they were destroyed. These projects were called the Forbidden Vaults. Every leader of Earth had known about them. Every one of them had prayed that the vaults would never need to be opened. President Tanaka opened them all. "I want everything," she told the scientists. "Every weapon we have hidden, every technology we kept locked away, every secret we were too afraid to use. Bring it all out." The head scientist, a very old man named Dr. Chen, looked at her with worried eyes. "President, some of these projects are dangerous. We sealed them away for good reasons." "I know," Tanaka said. "But the hegemony has decided to teach us about violence. They believe we are soft. They believe we are weak because we wanted peace. Her voice became cold and quiet. Let us show them how wrong they are. Across Earth, factories that had been building exploration ships started building something else. Soldiers who had trained for defense started training for attack. Scientists who had studied the stars started studying war. Humanity had spent 15 years reaching out with an open hand. That hand was now closing into a fist. In a refugee camp on Mars, James Harrington found his wife and daughter. They had survived. He held them and cried and thanked whatever gods were listening. Then he reported for duty. "What are my orders, sir?" he asked his commander. The commander handed him a new uniform. It was black instead of blue. On the shoulder was a symbol James had never seen before, a rising phoenix wrapped in fire. "You've been selected for Project Fenria," the commander said. "The president is building a new kind of army. Are you willing?" James thought about New Geneva. He thought about the children he could not save. He thought about the Vectari ships raining fire from the sky.
Yes.
He said, "I'm willing." The galaxy had taught humanity that peace was impossible. Now humanity was going to teach the galaxy something in return. 6 months into the war, humanity was losing. The hegemony's forces were vast beyond imagination. They had ships that had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They had soldiers from a dozen species, each one born and bred for battle. They had weapons that could crack planets like eggs. Against all of this, humanity had courage and desperation and nothing else. Admiral Chen. Wayland stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched her fleet burn. They had fought well. They had destroyed 30 Vectari warships. But the Vectari had brought 300, Admiral, her tactical officer reported. "We've lost the Constellation and the Braveheart. The Hope is venting atmosphere. Enemy forces are flanking our position." Chen nodded calmly. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands. She had been a naval officer for 40 years. She had seen battle before, but nothing like this. "Pull the Hope behind our lines," she ordered. "Redirect power from weapons to shields. We need to survive long enough to retreat. Admiral, if we retreat, we lose the Kepler system. 50 million people live there." Chen closed her eyes for a moment. 50 million people. 50 million lives depending on her decisions. And she did not have enough ships to save them. "Begin evacuation of the planet," she said quietly. "We'll buy them as much time as we can." The Battle of Kepler Station lasted for 14 hours. Chen used every trick she knew. She hid ships behind asteroid fields. She sent drones to confuse enemy sensors. She sacrificed damaged vessels to create openings for others to escape. In the end, she saved 30 million people. 20 million did not make it. It was called a victory. Chen felt like a failure. This was the story of the war. Humanity fought hard. Humanity fought smart. Humanity never stopped fighting. But they were outnumbered and outgunned at every turn. The hegemony did not need to be clever. They simply had more of everything. On occupied worlds, the Vectari expected humans to surrender. That was what conquered species did. They bowed their heads and accepted their new masters. It was the natural order of things. But humans did not follow the natural order. On the occupied colony of Haven, a Vectari commander named Crix stood in the ruins of a human city and felt something he had never felt before. Confusion. His soldiers had rounded up the surviving humans and placed them in camps. They had taken their weapons. They had destroyed their communications. By every rule of conquest, these creatures should be broken. They should be begging for mercy. Instead, they were singing. Crix walked through the camp and listened. Old women sang songs about hope. Children sang songs about freedom. Men who had been beaten until they could barely stand sang songs about a better tomorrow. The sound filled the night air like a strange and terrible music. "Why do they sing?" Crix asked his second in command. "They have lost everything." His second had no answer. The next morning, Crix discovered that 3 of his supply stations had been destroyed during the night. Human prisoners had escaped and formed resistance groups. They had stolen weapons and vanished into the wilderness. His soldiers searched for them but found nothing. The humans knew their world better than any alien ever could. Crick sent a report to the 12 thrones. They do not surrender. Even their children hide their siblings from us. Even their elderly fight back. When we kill one, 2 more take their place. What manner of creatures are these? The 12 thrones had no answer either. Across the galaxy, other species watched the war with growing interest. The colony had been conquered by the hegemony 5,000 years ago. They had learned to accept their place. They served as diplomats and translators, using their natural grace to smooth over conflicts between the ruling species. They had forgotten what freedom felt like, but now they remembered. A young colony named Syrah worked as a translator in the hegemony's military headquarters. Every day, she processed reports about the war against humanity. Every day, she read about human resistance and human courage and human refusal to give up. Something stirred inside her. Something dangerous. She began to make copies of the reports. She began to share them with other colony. She began to whisper, "If the humans can fight, why can't we?" The Morvic had an even harder existence. They were used as slave labor in the hegemony's mines. They dug her from frozen asteroids and built ships that they would never be allowed to fly. Their masters beat them when they worked too slowly. Their children were taken away and raised in camps to ensure loyalty, but the Morvic had long memories. They remembered a time before the hegemony, when they had been free. They told stories in secret, passing them down from parent to child. Stories about honor and courage and a prophecy that said one day, liberators would come from beyond the stars. When they heard about the humans, they wondered, could this be the prophecy coming true? The war continued. Humanity lost more battles than they won. More colonies burned. More ships were destroyed. But something strange was happening. The humans were not getting weaker. They were getting stronger. On Mars, a Vectari assault force landed near a human city that had already been bombed into rubble. The soldiers expected to find corpses and refugees. Instead, they found construction crews. The humans were rebuilding. Right there, in the middle of a war zone. With enemy ships still visible in the sky, humans were laying new foundations and raising new walls. When the Vectari attacked, the construction workers picked up weapons and fought back. Then, when the battle was over, the survivors went back to building. A Vectari officer recorded the scene and sent it to High Lord Vexen with a single question: how do we defeat an enemy that refuses to be defeated? Vexen watched the recording many times. He watched humans pull wounded comrades from burning buildings. He watched them share their last food with hungry children. He watched them cry over their dead and then stand up and keep going. For the first time in his long life, Vexen felt something like doubt. Then the first project, Prometheus. Ships arrived at the front lines. They were strange vessels, covered in technology that the hegemony had never seen. Their engines glowed with a blue light that hurt to look at. They moved through space in ways that should have been impossible, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Admiral Chen Weilin led them into battle herself. When a Vectari fleet tried to ambush her at the Sigma Draconis system, she did something that changed the war forever. Her ships phased out of normal space entirely. They became ghosts, invisible and untouchable. Then they reappeared inside the Vectari formation, their weapons already firing. The Vectari ships exploded before they could even respond. In 10 minutes, the battle was over. 200 Vectari warships were destroyed. Chen's fleet had lost none. She opened a channel that broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every hegemony ship heard her words. Every conquered species heard them too. You taught us that peace was impossible. You taught us that kindness was weakness. You taught us that the only law is the law of the strong. Her voice was calm and cold. Thank you for the lesson. Now let us show you what we learned. Deep in the refugee camps and slave quarters of 100 worlds, the conquered species listened. And for the first time in thousands of years, they began to hope. Ambassador David Okonkwo was alive. Everyone thought he had died on New Geneva, but he had escaped on one of the last ships. For months he had been traveling in secret. Moving from world to world with a small team of volunteers, He was not carrying weapons. He was carrying something more dangerous. He was carrying a message. Humanity remembers what freedom means, he told the colony. To you? The hegemony is not unbeatable, he told the Morvik. We have proved it. Will you help us prove it again? You have been slaves for too long, he told every conquered species he could reach. It is time to remember who you used to be. The seeds of rebellion were planted. Soon, they would grow. 1 year into the war, the galaxy learned what humanity could truly become. High Lord Vexen stood in the command center of the hegemony's mightiest war fleet. 5,000 ships surrounded him, each one bristling with weapons, each one crewed by the finest warriors in the galaxy. He had assembled this force for one purpose: to crush humanity once and for all. Intelligence reports said that a human fleet was hiding in the Arcturus system. Only 80 ships. It would be a simple victory. A statement to the galaxy that the hegemony was still supreme. All ships advance, Vexen commanded. Leave no survivors. The hegemony fleet entered the system in perfect formation. Their sensors swept the darkness, searching for targets. They found the human ships clustered near a small moon, seemingly trapped. Vexen allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They have nowhere to run. All ships, weapons free. Then the human ships began to glow. It was not a normal light. It was something deeper. Something that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. The blue glow spread from the human vessels and wrapped around them like living fire. Then, impossibly, the ships began to fade. What is happening? Vexen demanded. Why can't I see them? My lord, his sensor officer said with fear in his voice, they've vanished. They're not on any of our instruments. It's like they don't exist anymore. For a long moment, nothing happened. The hegemony fleet hung in space, searching for enemies that had disappeared. Vexen felt something cold crawling up his spine. In all his years of war, he had never experienced anything like this. Then the human ships reappeared. Not in front of the hegemony fleet. Not behind it. Inside it, Admiral Chen Wayland's voice echoed across every hegemony communication channel. Hello, High Lord. We've been practicing. The slaughter that followed would be remembered for 1,000 years. Human ships phased in and out of existence like ghosts, appearing just long enough to fire their weapons before vanishing again. Hegemony vessels exploded one after another, unable to hit targets that weren't really there. Vexen watched his mighty fleet die around him. Ship after ship was destroyed. Captains screamed for help on channels that went silent one by one. In the end, only Vexen's flagship remained. Surrounded by the wreckage of 5,000 warships, the human vessels materialized in a perfect circle around him. Their weapons were charged and aimed at his bridge. One word from Admiral Chen, and he would join his fleet in death. But the word didn't come. Instead, Chen's face appeared on his view screen. She was smiling, but there was no joy in it. Only sadness and cold determination. You had 15 years to accept peace, she said. You had 15 years to treat us as equals. We offered you everything we had. Friendship, knowledge, hope, and you answered with fire and death. Vexen said nothing. There was nothing to say. I could destroy you now, Chen continued. It would be easy. One command and your ship becomes dust. One command and you pay for every human life you've taken. She leaned forward. But that is not who we are. That is not who we want to be. She pressed a button, and the weapons powered down. Go home, High Lord. Tell the 12 thrones what you saw here. Tell them that humanity's patience has ended, but our mercy has not. There is still time to stop this war. There is still time to choose peace. Vexen's ship was allowed to leave. He flew back to Throne Prime alone, surrounded by the ghosts of his fleet. When he arrived, he went before the 12 thrones and delivered his report. They are no longer the creatures we attacked, he said. His voice was hollow, broken. They have become something else. Something terrible. And they are coming for us. The 12 thrones argued for days. Some wanted to sue for peace. Others demanded more attacks, more resources, more soldiers. But while they argued, the galaxy was changing around them. On the Kalani homeworld, the revolution began quietly. Sira, the young translator, had spent months building a network of rebels. They had gathered weapons stolen from hegemony armories. They had recruited thousands of Kalani who were tired of serving masters who despised them. When the moment came, they struck everywhere at once. Hegemony officials were captured. Military bases were surrounded. The Kalani flag, unseen for 5,000 years, was raised over the capital city. Sira broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. The Kalani are free. We stand with humanity. Join us. The Morvic were next. In the mining stations scattered across 100 asteroids, slaves put down their tools and picked up weapons. They seized the ships they had built and flew them toward human space. Their leader, an old miner named Grok, sent his own message. The prophecy was true. The liberators came. Now we fight beside them. One by one, the conquered species rose up. The Talassians stopped building hegemony ships. The Vorn refused to grow food for their masters. Even the Kethani, a species so thoroughly beaten that they had forgotten their own name, found the courage to rebel. President Yuki Tanaka watched the reports with tears in her eyes. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of hope. She had never wanted war. She had spent her whole life believing in peace. But sometimes, she now understood, peace had to be won. Sometimes you had to fight so hard that your enemies finally understood that fighting was pointless. She prepared a broadcast. Not just to humanity this time, but to everyone. Every species in the hegemony, every slave and servant and conquered people, every one of the 12 thrones. People of the galaxy, she began. I speak to you today not as your enemy, but as your future friend. Humanity did not start this war. We did not want this war. For 15 years, we tried everything we could think of to avoid it. We offered our hand in friendship. We were answered with the deaths of millions. She paused, letting the words sink in. But we did not fight back out of hatred. We fought back because we believe in something greater than ourselves. We believe that every species deserves to be free. We believe that cooperation is better than conquest. We believe that the strong should protect the weak, not enslave them. Images appeared on screens across the galaxy. Human soldiers sharing food with Kalani refugees. Human doctors treating wounded Morvic miners. Human ships carrying freed slaves to safety. Look at what we have done, Tanaka continued. Look at who stands beside us now. The Kalani fight with us. The Morvic fight with us. Dozens of species who were told they were worthless, who were told they would be slaves forever, now stand tall and free. Her voice grew stronger. We didn't want to teach the galaxy about war. We wanted to teach you about peace, but you refused to listen. So we taught you about war first. Now, perhaps you are ready for the second lesson. She looked directly into the camera. To the 12 thrones. Your empire is falling. Your slaves are rising up. Your fleets are burning. You have a choice to make. Continue this war, and you will lose everything. Or accept the peace we offered 15 years ago. The same peace, the same terms, equality, cooperation, mutual respect. The choice is yours. On Throne Prime, the 12 thrones received the message. They looked at each other with fear and uncertainty. Their empire was crumbling. Their armies were stretched thin, trying to fight rebellions on 100 fronts. The humans they had dismissed as prey were now hunting them. High Lord Vexen spoke first. Perhaps we should consider her offer. Another throne, Lord Cassine of the Morvex, shook his massive reptilian head. Never. We have ruled for 50,000 years. We will not bow to these insects. The argument continued, but time was running out. In the darkness of space, a massive fleet was assembling. Human ships flew beside Kalani cruisers and Morvic transports and vessels from a dozen other species. They flew under a new banner. Not the flag of any single world, but a symbol showing many hands joined together. Admiral Chin Wayland stood on the bridge of the newly built Us Unity and addressed her combined fleet. Today we fly to Throne Prime, she said. Today we end this war. But remember why we fight. We fight so that our children can live in peace. We fight so that no species ever has to bow to another again. We fight not to conquer, but to free. She looked at the alien officers standing beside her human crew. Kalani navigators, Morvic engineers, Talassian gunners. All working together, all believing in the same dream. Let's go finish this. The fleet jumped to light speed. The final battle was about to begin. Throne Prime had never been attacked. For 50,000 years, it had stood as the symbol of hegemony power. Its orbital stations bristled with weapons. Its defense fleet numbered in the thousands. Its shields could withstand the fury of a dying star. It was the heart of an empire that had ruled the galaxy since before humans learned to make fire. Now that heart was about to stop beating. The combined fleet emerged from lightspeed, perfect formation. Admiral Chen Weilin looked at the tactical display and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Thousands of ships followed her commands. Human vessels, Kalani cruisers, Morvic transports. Ships from a dozen species that had risen up against their masters. They were the largest fleet ever assembled. They were here to change the galaxy forever. Admiral, her communications officer reported, the hegemony defense fleet is moving to intercept. They're broadcasting a warning. They say we will be destroyed if we advance. Chen smiled slightly. Let them come. The Battle of Throne Prime lasted for 3 days. It was the largest space battle in recorded history. Ships burned and exploded across 1,000,000 kilometers of space. Warriors from 100 species fought and died in the cold darkness between the stars. The light from the weapons fire was so bright that people on Throne Prime's surface could see it in their sky. Even during the day, Admiral Chen commanded from the front lines. Her Prometheus-class flagship phasing in and out of reality to strike at the heart of the enemy formation. James Harrington led the Fenris soldiers in boarding actions against hegemony command ships. The Kalani fighters danced through the enemy fleet like deadly silver birds. The Morvic crews fought with the fury of a people who had been enslaved for too long. Slowly, painfully, the hegemony defense fleet was destroyed. On the second day, the orbital stations fell. Chen's ships surrounded them and offered a simple choice: surrender or die. Most surrendered. The ones that didn't were reduced to burning wreckage. On the third day, the shields protecting Throne Prime flickered and died. The combined fleet had one. Chen ordered all ships to hold position. Her weapons were charged and ready. From here, she could bombard the planet below until nothing lived on its surface. She could end the hegemony forever. She could take revenge for every human life that had been lost. She opened a channel to the 12 thrones. This is Admiral Chen Weilin of the United Earth Navy. Your fleet is destroyed. Your defenses are broken. Your empire is falling apart around you. I have enough firepower aimed at your planet to turn it into dust. She paused, letting the words sink in. But I'm not going to use it. In the council chamber of the 12 thrones, the ruling species of the galaxy stared at their view screens in shock. They had expected death. They had expected to see their world burn like they had burned so many human worlds. They had expected revenge. They had not expected mercy. We could destroy you, Chen continued. It would be easy. It would be fair. After everything you've done to us, no one would blame us. But that is not why we fought this war. Ambassador David Okonkwo stepped up beside the admiral. He looked older now, his hair completely gray, his face lined with the weight of all he had seen. But his eyes were still kind. His voice was still gentle. 15 years ago, I came to you with an offer of peace, he said. You laughed at me. You called me weak. You said that prey does not negotiate with predators. And then you tried to destroy my people. He spread his hands. I come to you now with the same offer: peace, partnership, equality, not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, but because we believe that the future must be different from the past. We believe that even enemies can become friends. We believe that the cycle of conquest and slavery must end. The 12 thrones were silent. High Lord. Vexen stepped forward. He looked like a broken creature. All his pride, all his certainty, had been burned away by the war. Why? He asked. Why would you show us mercy after everything we've done? Okonkwo smiled sadly. because that's who we are. That's who we've always been. You never understood that. You saw our kindness and called it weakness. You saw our hope and called it foolishness. You thought that because we wanted peace, we couldn't fight. He shook his head. Yeah, you were wrong. Humanity has always known how to fight. We have fought each other for thousands of years. We have done terrible things. But we have also learned, slowly and painfully, that there is a better way. We built a world where former enemies live together as brothers. We created a civilization that values every life, no matter where it comes from. His voice grew stronger. We wanted to share that with you. We wanted to show the galaxy what we had learned. You refused to listen, so we had to teach you the hard way. The 12 thrones bowed their heads. There was no more argument. There was no more pride. They had lost, and they knew it. The terms of surrender were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. There were no executions. There were no enslavements. There were no demands for territory or tribute. Instead, humanity offered something revolutionary, a new beginning. The 12 thrones were dissolved. In their place, a new galactic council was formed. Every species would have an equal voice. Every world would have the right to govern itself. No one would be master. No one would be slave. The old rulers were put on trial for their crimes, but even they were not killed. They were given the chance to learn, to change, to become something better than they had been. Some accepted. Others refused and were imprisoned. But not one was executed. As the new government took shape, David Okonkwo walked through the streets of Throne Prime. Former slaves walked beside former masters. Kalani diplomats negotiated with Vectari generals. Morvic workers shared meals with the species that had once beaten them. It was messy and difficult, and sometimes people shouted at each other. But they were talking. They were trying. A young Kalani named Sira fell into step beside him. She had become one of the leaders of her people's revolution. "Ambassador," she said, "I have to ask you something. After everything the hegemony did to you, how can you forgive them? How can you offer peace to creatures who murdered your children?" Okonkwo thought about the question for a long time. He thought about New Geneva burning. He thought about his friends who had died. He thought about all the pain and loss and grief. "I don't forgive them," he said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I know that hatred is a prison. I know that revenge is a trap. If we become like them, then they win. They prove that the universe is just an endless cycle of violence and conquest." He looked up at the sky, where human ships flew beside Kalani cruisers. "I choose to believe in something better. I choose to believe that even the worst enemies can become friends. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm foolish. But I would rather be foolish and hopeful than wise and cruel." On Earth, Admiral Chen Weilin visited a memorial. It was a simple wall covered with names. Every human who had died in the war. Millions of names, stretching from one end of a great park to the other. She found the section for New Geneva. She found the names of the people she had failed to save. She stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then she removed the medals from her uniform. Every honor she had been given, every award for her victories. She placed them at the base of the memorial and walked away. A reporter asked her why. "'Cause they're not mine," she said. "They belong to the people who actually paid the price. I just did my job. They gave their lives." 50 years later, a historian from a distant species wrote a book about the Hegemony War. Her species had never met humans, till after the conflict was over. She had spent decades studying the records, interviewing survivors, and trying to understand what had happened. Her book became famous across 100 worlds. The opening paragraph was quoted in schools and governments and universities everywhere for 15 years. Humanity offered peace and received only war and ruin in answer. What the galaxy failed to understand was this: humanity's capacity for peace was not weakness. It was restraint. And when that restraint was broken, the galaxy discovered that the species who wanted peace most desperately was also the one most terrifying in war. But humanity's final lesson was the most remarkable of all. Even after everything, they chose to offer peace again. This time, the galaxy was wise enough to accept. In a refugee center on a world that had once been a battlefield, An old human woman sat with a young Vectari child. The child had lost her family in the war. She was scared and alone and didn't understand why everyone around her spoke of humans with such complicated emotions. The old woman shared her lunch with the child. "Simple food, nothing special? Hungry?" she asked. The child looked at her with confused eyes. She had been taught that humans were prey animals, weak and soft, fit only for conquest. But this woman didn't look weak. She looked kind. She looked strong in a way that had nothing to do with weapons or violence. The child took the food and ate it. "Thank you," she said quietly. The old woman smiled. "You're welcome, little one. You're welcome." Outside, the sun was setting on a galaxy that was finally learning what humanity had known all along. That peace was not weakness. That mercy was not foolishness. That the greatest strength of all was the courage to offer your hand in friendship. Even to those who had tried to destroy you, the war was over. The healing had begun. And for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy looked toward a future that was full of hope.